Hi, I'm Chris from Development. Let's take a look at using the Coronium Core Webmin, which allows you to visualize some metrics and also some of the newer modules that were introduced in version 2.1, like the users and some of the analytics and metrics. First thing you need to do to set up the Webmin is in the guide here, there is a Webmin guide section, and it has a few entries here for us. Setup and access is the first thing we want to look at. And basically the Webmin is built on the Pages module that's included in the Coronium Core server. So if you haven't configured the Pages module, you'll need to do that first before accessing the Webmin. And if you already have a Coronium Core server running and you've already done this and authenticated the Pages module, then you don't need to do this again. But here in the Setup Access, there is a link here to how to configure the Pages module, so we'll go ahead and go through that just in case you haven't done that before. To back up just a teeny bit, I already have a 2.1 Coronium Core server set up, and I have set it up to be production ready, which means that I've given it a domain name and I've also secured it with HTTPS. So all that's already been done, and all those instructions can be found in the documentation as well as some of the other screencasts. But at this point I have a running 2.1 version that is production ready with a domain name and HTTPS. And we can see that by looking at the demo project here that we'll be working with. And here on my server I've set up the endpoint here. I've already gone ahead and input that. I'm just using this throwaway domain name, and then I've entered my key, and again all that information was gathered from the documentation. So make sure that you have that set up. You can do all of this just using an IP address if you just want to run some tests and just play around with it before building up a production ready server. But in this case, that's what all the demos will be based on. So again, I went ahead and clicked in here into the Pages guide on how to authenticate the Pages module. So I'm currently in that area. And to do that, we simply are going to take this call here to the server and generate the authentication for it. So I've gone ahead and just copied that to the clipboard, and I'm going into my demo project here. I've already put in this onResponse function. This is something that I'll be using later for other things, but it's already in there, so forgive me for that. I'm going to go ahead and copy in this core.pages generate auth function, and we only need to run this one time. It's all explained again in the guide. We need to run this one time to authenticate the Pages module. Because the Webmin is built on the Pages module, we need to make sure that that has been done at least once. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to Corona. I have my demo project open. I'm going to do a refresh, and our result is true, which is what we're looking for, which means that the authentication has been generated for the Pages module. Once this is done, we never need to worry about this again for the life of the server, and so we're all set up there. So now we're able to access the Webmin module. The Webmin screen via our browser. So I'm going to jump over to our web browser, and I'm back here in the Webmin guide again under the Setup Access. And if we go down to the Webmin Access here, we can see that we have our domain endpoints here on how we actually access this administration kind of screen. If you've decided to just want to do some testing and are just using an IP address, then you can just go ahead and use it with a normal HTTP. But if you set up your system with HTTPS, which I highly recommend, then you're going to be using this second domain name, path here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a new browser window. In this case, I'm just going to use an incognito window. And our endpoint is HTTPS, and we are at core demo, and my throwaway domain here is sleeptank.xyz. We /_coronium/webmin, and then you need to add a trailing slash to the end of that domain path there. Once that happens, we're going to be prompted for some authentication. This is also outlined in the documentation, but the username is cloudwebmin, and if you haven't changed the password, it is going to be cloudadmin, and this is also documented in the guide on how you can change the password for this. And then we'll go ahead and log in, and we will get our webmin here. And there's a few things that are going on here. We have a couple different sections here on the left side. Right now, since we really haven't done much, there isn't a lot of data in here for us to look at, but there are a couple different sections here. Then this also points you to some of the other modules that you can use to start adding data to this. But basically, this first one is the application opens, which is kind of gives you some metrics for how many times your application has been accessed. There's a users section which will be gone through, and these are for user registrations and things like that. A devices section which will give you metrics on your devices. Projects area, and this is where you can create your projects to create custom APIs. And then there's also a built-in code editor that you can use to go ahead and build that without having to use an SFTP. We got our logs area here, so you can read your debug logs, and then there's some configuration settings for different aspects of some of the modules, one of them being the mailgun. And then here is our confirmation host, which this is also part of the user email confirmations, which will be talked about in a different screencast. You can also find your server key here as well in the config section. And down here at the very bottom is a process bar, which will give you an idea of how much the processing power that your server is using up at any given time. So right now we're not using any resources here, it's minimal, but you can keep your eye on that to see as certain things are going on, this bar will actually increase depending upon the processing that's going on the CPU, and this can give you a good idea of whether you need to possibly upgrade your CPU or maybe perhaps you need to rewrite some of your code to be more efficient. But that's how we get into the Webmin, and in some future videos we are going to look at how we start to get data into here so that we can take a look at how to use it. But again, that's how we access and set up the Webmin. It's important that you first authenticate the Pages module, which we went through, and that is in the guide. And then at that point, just follow the instructions on how to get into your Webmin. There's also some other sections here in the Webmin guide, one being the mailgun config. For all the email usage, especially if you're going to be confirming users using email, which is an optional feature, you'll need to be using a mailgun account for that, so this talks a little bit about that. Also to use the email module in general, which is a new module in 2.1, you need to have a mailgun configuration. The password section here shows you how you can change your Webmin password, which is what we used when we first logged in to the Webmin. And so that's where you can find information about that. And so from there, that's pretty much it as far as getting the Webmin set up and viewable. So we'll move on, and in other videos we'll start to talk about how we actually access the different modules to add data to this, so we can take a look at the different statistics and metrics and whatnot. There's also a quick handy button over here in the upper right, which is takes you to the documentation if you need to jump into the docs. So that's it for setting up and accessing the Webmin. Hope you enjoy that. Thanks for watching.